If you have a record, you have been assigned a lifetime sentence, whether you know it or not. And the stigma is going to outlive anybody who's alive today.
Hey there, high performers. This is Dr. Josh Funk. In this podcast, I will be interviewing people from the sports and business world who have experienced hardship and come out on top. Through their challenges, strategies, and mindset, I hope that it will give you the tools you need to perform for life. Hey, high performers. This is Dr. Funk here with Richard Bronson. I am very, very excited to bring to you him today because he is somebody who I think is doing what I would call a purpose-driven business. He is the CEO and founder of 70 Million Jobs, a company that is focused on helping the transition for people who have been incarcerated back to the workplace. Richard, welcome.
Thank you so much, Josh.
For your story, I think it would be best for the listeners to appreciate the fact that you have gone from the highest of highs to also the lowest of lows. A big tie-in for you being the Wolf of Wall Street, you actually being a partner at one point in time at Stratton Oakmont, then leaving that company, starting up your own $100+ million company, and then ending up incarcerated. What can you tell the listeners a little bit about that time in your life and where that led you to eventually be imprisoned?
Sure. I am from New York, and I actually went to college to study journalism, and I assumed that that would be a career that I would pursue. But upon completion of school and returning to New York, it quickly became apparent to me that if I wanted to drive the Porsches and take summers in the Hampton and go out with all the pretty girls, I would need to earn a lot of money, particularly in New York. And that being a struggling journalist / writer was a challenging, if not impossible, path to take to reach those kind of goals. So I ended up getting a job on Wall Street, as many of my friends were as well. And this is actually, I started in 1987 on Wall Street, pretty much the week that Black Monday occurred. And most of your listeners probably weren't around for that, but the market had its worst percentage crash ever in that one day. And I had just, gotten involved. So I was kind of blown away, that, my God, there are forces that are outside of my control that are going to dictate my future and my future earnings potential. So I, like lots of other people that I knew who worked on Wall Street, sort of assumed an attitude of, well, if the market's going to act like this out of our control, the one thing for sure is we better be making a lot of money. And that mantra, greed is good, and the movie Wall Street, that was kind of like the prevailing attitude. I worked at a few big banks. And then, as you mentioned, a friend of mine was working at this little sleepy brokerage firm on Long Island called Stratton Oakmont, where people who barely completed high school were nonetheless making an obscene amount of money. And so I got involved there, and in short order, I became a partner there, which is to say that I too began making a lot of money and was very much involved in all the insanity that went on there, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And if you've seen the movie, in general, it was a pretty fair depiction of what was going on. It was crazy, but we had an enormous amount of fun. I left there after about a year to launch my own firm in Florida, Southern Florida. And as you mentioned, it grew quickly. And I had about 500 employees and generating, a huge amount of revenue, making a lot of money, and becoming, a rock star down in Miami Beach, in South Beach. And it was an amazing time in my life. I lived next door to Eric Clapton's house, and I owned a nightclub and published a magazine and knew everybody. And, it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, part of my success came through breaking the law on an ongoing basis. It was the sort of thing that lots of companies were doing, but certainly I knew it was wrong. And even while I was doing it, I felt guilty, but nonetheless, I did it. So, I truly have no excuses whatsoever for my behavior. I was stupid. I was greedy. I was impatient. And eventually, as I knew it would happen, I had to pay the price for all of that. Despite paying everybody back, which I did, nonetheless, I was still guilty, and rightfully I was punished for what I did. And I received a 2-year prison sentence in a federal prison. I went into prison. Prior to going to prison, whatever money I had left, I just gave away to charity, essentially, because I just felt so sick of myself and ashamed and guilty and what money had done to me. So all that made sense was just to get rid of all the money I had. So I went into prison with nothing, and 2 years in prison or so, I came out and I had less than nothing, which is common for people who go through the criminal justice system. The prison I went to was, a low security facility. Actually, I was in prison with Jared Kushner's father. Charlie was there, plus lots of other white collar criminals. There was a congressman there and chairmen of well-known public companies. This was the place that people, wanted to go to. It was not a violent place. As a matter of fact, it was a pretty safe place because people who were there, regardless of who they were and their background, they knew that they had it relatively pretty good. And that if they screwed up or got in a fight or made a problem with anybody, it would result in them going to a much worse place. So as a result, people are on their very best behavior, which is kind of interesting and not what you would expect. I came out of prison without a job, and I was homeless, and I was destitute. I didn't have a penny. I was deeply in debt, as a matter of fact. Thank God I had a sister who had a couch. That was my one asset. I just couldn't stop just shaking my head in bewilderment about how much my life had changed from the days where I was taking private jets and driving Ferraris and buying expensive art and, leading a very different life where I had dropped so precipitously to I had nothing, no prospects. Friends disappear, all these things you expect just don't play out. And certainly it's a very familiar thing. It happens to almost everybody who goes through this experience. But I knew, as bad as it was for me, it could have been worse, because here I am, a white male in white corporate America. I had a college education. What about the guys I was in prison with who were, many of them were young men of color who had very little education, very little job experience? What would become of them? What were their prospects if they were so challenging for me? And the answer, as I later learned, is they don't have too many, if any. And inevitably, almost inevitably, 75% or so will end up breaking the law again and ending up back in jail or prison. That's the rate of recidivism. So I kicked around for a couple of years, just wasting time, trying to figure out who I was, what was I meant to do. And it was very, very difficult time for me. Eventually, though, I got lucky. I discovered a nonprofit that is in the reentry space. It's called Defy Ventures, DEFY Ventures. And I went to work there in New York. And eventually I became director in New York. And it was a very positive experience for me because I knew I was on a mission and I was doing good, or trying to do good. The organization, exists to help people in and out of prison and give them opportunities. So its intentions are perfect. like many other nonprofits in that space. Unfortunately, the impact that they are having or have, along with many others, and I know them all and I'm friends with all of them and I admire all of them, nonetheless, they weren't getting the job done. Even before the onset of the coronavirus, the rate of unemployment among the people with records was almost 30%, which was the highest rate of unemployment of any population in our country's history, including during the Great Depression. And that was when the rest of the country was enjoying record low unemployment. I can only imagine what it must be now, deep into, the pandemic. But I felt like this was a space that was really ready to be disrupted. It needed to be shaken up. Things needed to be done differently. An approach that might involve technology, an approach that might be done for profit. Maybe that would represent a great business opportunity. That was my thinking, and it is my thinking. So I left my nonprofit work and I launched the company at the end of 2016. And here we are today. We've helped thousands of people get jobs. We work very hard. Attitudes are still very negative towards this population. There's a lot of bias. There's a lot of racism. But we plug away, job by job by job, and things are improving. And we're committed to the work we're doing. I feel very lucky to be doing this work, and I feel very lucky that I did discover my calling in life. So that's a long answer to a short question, Josh.
No, that's okay. I think for me, just appreciating your journey, appreciating almost how reflective you've been over the process, not only reflective of self, but reflective just of the landscape and some of the things going on around you. During that period where you were incarcerated and that couple years after, what did you notice about your either routine, the people in your life, the things that you were thinking that allowed you to make this shift out of this extremely negative environment, coming out with much less than you were used to, and quite honestly, being in a situation where you easily could have looked at your life and kind of gone, this happened to me. All right, well, because this happened to me, this is how I'm going to be. But instead, you kind of reframed the narrative and flipped the script. So what are those things that you would credit to your ability to make that transition?
That's a big question. First, I would like to believe my parents, the way I was brought up in a good household, with loving parents. They both died at a young age, but they certainly gave me a sense that I wasn't put on this earth to break the law, and that in fact maybe I was put on this earth to do some good or something great. So I always had a pretty healthy ego. But when you go away to prison, one thing you have is a lot of time on your hands. And, they say, you don't let the time do you, you do the time, something like that. But the point being that you have a choice on how you use the time, and you can use it wisely. And, for most people, that means, well, they're going to get work out a lot, take up a hobby, read a lot, write a lot, and certainly think a lot. And I thought a lot, like everybody else. And I became interested in Buddhism, for example. And, I became very aware of how my ego, and my desire to kind of feel like, I was somehow something very, very special, that really kind of informed how I approached a lot of things. It's the opposite of humility, I guess. I wasn't humble at all. As a matter of fact, I most regret just being a jerk, just being disrespectful of people, feeling I was better than them. The rules didn't apply to me, and anybody who wasn't successful was a loser. That was widely held, within the world that I resided. We all felt that way, and that's a terrible way to feel. And when you go to prison, when you end up having a job that may be like scrubbing 100 toilets or raking leaves endlessly, it's very hard to feel like you're a big shot if you don't get humble from that. You just, God, you just, everything about the experience sort of beats you down that you're worthless and terrible, and which is good in a way, because out of that humility, there's truth and there's self-awareness. But what also impacted me is when I began working at that nonprofit, the woman who founded the organization, a woman by the name of Catherine Hoke, she taught me something that was incredibly powerful, that really did change my life. And she taught me about honesty. I grew up in a way where a man doesn't display his emotions, and you hold back things, and you have secrets, and it's no one's business. And, weakness is not something that you want to display. And as a result, I tried to hide my background, the bad parts. I tried to hide the fact that I was, incarcerated, that I committed crimes, that I acted badly. I thought, that's like self-protective. And she said, no, you're wrong. And I said, and I was holding these events and talking to donors and was kind of public. And she said, you got to come out and just be very honest about your background. And I was terrified to do it because I felt like people would really look so down upon me. It would just be devastating. And she said, no, trust me, you're going to find just the opposite happens. So I began tentatively opening up and sharing, my background, the good, the bad, the ugly, the dishonesty, the immorality, all this other shit that I was so deeply ashamed of. And I started letting it out. And what I discovered, much to my amazement, as she promised, was that not only did the world, not stop spinning on its axis, but people, liked me more. And people believed me and trusted me more, where I didn't feel like anyone would ever trust me again. And people have and had a compassion and a piece of their heart that they could open up and connect to someone and say, okay, you screwed up. Who among us hasn't screwed up in truth? And I would, by being honest about myself, people could be honest about themselves. And there would just be an environment of relentless honesty, which is incredibly powerful and connective. And it just puts you no longer, well, I'm so much better than you. Rather, we're all screwed up. We're all messed up. We all have made mistakes. Life is hard. It's hard for everybody. And that's what the Buddha said. Life is suffering. Life is pain. We all experience it. We're all doing the best we can. And sometimes along the way, we screw up. And when I started sharing that, my whole life changed to the better. Whereas now, I believe, and I've discovered, and I tell people that whatever you do, people ask me about starting a business or whatever. And I say, if you approach it just with an open heart and honesty and try to do the best you can and do the right thing, that maybe it won't play out positively immediately, but over time it will, in ways that you won't even expect. Good will come of it. And just have faith, faith in the universe, faith in God, whatever you're connecting to, that if you do that, and I discovered that it's true. And I don't mean to sound like, well, gee, I discovered something brand new. I discovered a cure for cancer or something. I feel like I was like one of the last to discover that. Other people knew that all along, perhaps, but that's when my life changed for the better. And as a result, I feel kind of like whatever I do, it's going to be okay if I bring the right kind of attitude and an openness, and an honesty and love with it. And I don't always succeed, for sure, but every day I try to do a little bit better.
Yeah, I think some things that I'm hearing, at least, and agree with, there's definitely beauty and vulnerability.
There's strength in vulnerability.
There you go. Yes. And then you've taken this extreme ownership over aspects of your life. You've been honest with people. You're saying you're almost empathetic towards your former self or things that have happened to you and in your life, recognizing that you still also could be this amazing person. You could be this impactful person. And most likely you're even going to be potentially even more impactful as a result of admitting what's gone on in your past, the things that happened in your life. Now getting to a point where you found your calling. You said you found your passion in life. You found the group of people that you feel best connected to serve because of your personal experiences. And I think that's that's amazing. And I think we hear more and more these purpose-focused businesses, right? They're going to be more transformational than they are transactional. When I think of like the book, like Conscious Capitalism, we're doing work very, very different. We're focusing on the people. We're focusing on the service, the deliverables, instead of maybe the world you were in before, where it's strictly bottom line driven. We're looking at numbers. We're focusing on objectivity in terms of success. But now you're focused on the people in terms of success. You had some great traction before everything that's going on right now with what you were trying to accomplish with this group of people, knowing that ownership comes in many different forms. What have you done to kind of get out in front of the current situation as an owner and being somebody that wants to continue to serve this group of people in a situation where many of them, as we were talking about this before the call, are being affected by the pandemic in the situation that they're in, and from a job market standpoint where obviously the unemployment rate is not going to decrease anytime soon?
Yeah, I would love to say that we figured out how to, transcend what's going on. But the truth is that there's not a business in the world that's not being impacted. Some, very few, are benefiting from the situation, but almost all of them, have been hurt, if not destroyed. And it certainly impacted our business because we're in the business of getting jobs for people. And there are almost no companies out there that are hiring people. And what exacerbates that, situation is the fact that the jobs that we typically help our job seekers find are jobs in warehouses and factories and construction and food service and hospitality. These are jobs that you can't work at from home. These are hourly jobs, which is to say, typically they're the first to go. And as a result, this has been devastating to our population and by extension to our business. I mean, from a business point of view, luckily we have money in the bank and we will, persevere and survive. And I have, been through a number of market crashes, so to speak, in cycles. Nobody's faced anything like this, certainly. I'm not suggesting I have experience in this because no one has. But in generally speaking, out of a terrible kind of, situation like this, out of a recession, out of a depression, ultimately there will be survivors. Opportunities will exist if you play it smart, if you watch your pennies, if you cut back on expense. There's a lot of things that you can do. And if you can hang in there, that often you'll come back stronger and better than you ever were. So we're counting on that. I feel terribly for the people, our job seekers, not to be a bleeding heart liberal any more than I really am, and I am one. But so many of these people who I've come to know and work with and meet were put on this earth in a terrible situation to begin with, in a family that was barely a family, where the world they lived in, they just look outside and, they didn't see opportunity the way, perhaps you and I saw. Their ideas, their friends and their family members, often were just earning a living or being successful doing something that was illegal. And that was the only path that they saw. And it was through no fault of their own. They could have been Mark Zuckerberg in a different set of circumstances, but that was the hand that they were dealt. And yet they did their time. They come out. They want to be responsible, productive, good people. Like my situation, I felt it. I go, all right, I screwed up, but now I want to get on with my life and do it the right way. I learned my lesson. For many people who go to jail or prison, they made mistakes when they were young. They were in gangs when they were 14 years old. They did something stupid. Who among us hasn't done stupid things when we were young? Sometimes we had a daddy who had a lawyer who got us out of trouble, or because of the color of our skin, we were treated differently or whatever. These are realities. This isn't just bleeding heart. I mean, this is the truth. This is what people went through. But the bottom line is they come out, they want to work. I mean, who doesn't think working is a good thing? Who doesn't admire someone who wants to work hard and pay their taxes and take care of their family, and leave that world behind? We work with these people all the time. They're heroic to me. And, and for no fault of their own, obviously they're going through what everybody is going through. And yet they still hang in there, and they still believe, have that faith in the universe, like we were talking about before, and they believe that there is a path for them. And my heart goes out to them. What we're trying to do, because for one reason is we got the time now. We have put into place and are building out a platform where we can not just help people get jobs, which is how we make money, but we're providing a lot of services and information that we won't monetize at all, but nonetheless are vitally important. So we've set up 800 numbers, and now we get calls from people who want to know not just about employment, but they want to know about unemployment, and they want to know where do they take their kids to get a test. Lots of things like that. Is there local support? We're helping people get involved with training and trade schools, because now is a good time to sort of take a little bit longer term approach. If you can't get a job now, use the time wisely to set yourself up for when things turn, and they will. You'll be in a position not to get a minimum wage job, but something a lot better. So we're working with companies that do training. I'm actually not to want to compete with you, but I'm going to be starting a podcast well. And we're going to be talking to folks like you're talking, but, obviously with an emphasis on the experience of those with records. There are 70 million people with records, 1 in 3 adults, believe it or not. So that's a huge population. And typically there's not a lot of information available to them. There's not a lot of community that's been created. People with records want to stay below the radar. They don't want to be involved together, but we think that's a shame, and we want to bring them together because there's strength in numbers. So we're doing webinars and as well, so we're doing a lot of things to try to bring value to the population. And again, that's one of those things that in the past I wouldn't have done that because there wasn't a direct way to make money from it. And, if we help one person, that'll be good. But I know that good things will come of it in ways I can't even imagine. So that's what we're doing to address the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you focus on people and the money will come. And then much like you're helping them, focusing on training, how do you develop them so that eventually when jobs are more readily available, that they can jump into those situations and ideally provide a lot of value, right? And I think one of the things that no matter what we do, that they're going to have to deal with is still going to be the stigma, right? The stigma associated with doing wrong previously. I always struggle with this question, but why do we have such a hard time allowing ourselves to let things go? We want to, and if I look just at the Michael Vick situation, just because that was a big thing recently, but somebody did something wrong, and then we automatically want to cancel or erase any good that he could potentially do in the future as a result of what he did or who he was at a given time, without maybe appreciating the fact that he might have grown up in an environment where it was more widely accepted, where he didn't have this perception of right or wrong as much, or like some of the people you mentioned, where it was really the only way that they had ever known. So what are your thoughts on really why people struggle with second chances and giving people second chances?
It's such a, great question. And that's the kind of thing that in prison we'd sit around talking about for like hours on end. I think it has a lot to do with the sort of ego that was at the root of my problems, that we are all, you know, inherently or at our very base, fundamentally, we're maybe little children who are afraid of the world. We're scared, we're weak, we're imperfect, certainly. And we fear that if people knew of our imperfections and weaknesses, it would not be a good thing for us. It would hurt us. It's like a fight or flight kind of thing. I have to create these defenses. And one way to create a defense is to separate the world in us versus them. It could be done religiously. It could be done on a sexual basis. I used to do this. There's good-looking girls, and then there's everybody else. There's our school and other schools that we're competing with. There's it's throughout our sports. It's all over the place. It's us versus them. What happened in our country is we had this thing called the war on drugs, and that was when people started taking a lot of drugs. Kids in college were smoking pot and other drugs. Crack hit our cities, and conservative politicians felt we need to have a war on drugs, and we need to lock up for long periods of time, lots and lots of people who were part of for all of this. So that was the 80s, the 90s, and that resulted in an explosion in our prison and jail populations. We have about 5% of the world's population, and yet we have 25% of the incarcerated population. I'm a patriot. I love my country, but there's certain things about us, including our criminal justice system, that is really among the very worst in the world. We put juveniles in solitary confinement. No other country does that. Not in Afghanistan, not in Russia, not in China, not in North Korea. They don't do things that we do. There was always an attitude of it's us versus them. They're animals, lock them up and throw away the key. There's a lot of racism that's inherent in that too, obviously. But what happened was people started seeing that the animals that were being locked up, were not just young Black people from the ghetto that had nothing to do with them. Instead, they were started to be family members and friends. And college kids from nice white families started ending up in prison. And women and girls. And when that happened, you can't keep calling a family member an animal and lock them up and throw away the key. Something's got to give. They're no longer them. It turns out that them is us. And when that happened, attitudes started to change. And that's what we're seeing now. And we're seeing attitudes towards the formerly incarcerated improving. Not fast enough, certainly from my taste, but we're seeing that companies, little by little, are starting to consider, hiring this population just in the same way that it used to be that women were shunned in the workplace. And the same things were said about them. They're going to be disruptive. They can't be trusted, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out, the women's movement kind of changed minds. And then all of a sudden we realized how stupid was that thinking? Who could imagine a workplace without women? And it happened with African Americans through the civil rights movement. And it happened more recently with like LGBTQ community, that so quickly attitudes, have changed, laws have changed, and we look back and we're almost ashamed. It's embarrassing. It's almost comical how stupid we were. Well, I think a lot of people are starting to feel that way about the formerly incarcerated, that they made mistakes, but everybody makes mistakes. And that doesn't mean that they're bad people. I'm not talking about people who are mass murderers. I'm not talking about crazy, people who have done horrible, horrible things. I don't know how I feel about that, quite frankly. Companies never want to hire them right now, and we are a for-profit venture. So we rarely get involved with somebody who is unemployable as far as companies are concerned, because I got to pay the rent. And I have employees who expect to get paid every week. So we pick out people that we believe are great bets, who have come out of prison, who have stayed out of trouble, And, who, if we get them in with a company, it will reflect well on us and the greater population, and the company will want to get more people just like them. But, attitudes are changing. I feel terrible about what I did. I still wait. I paid everybody back. I went to prison 20 years ago for things I did 30 years ago, and still every day I wake up ashamed. And I don't think, I just accept that that's going to be the way I am, which is unfortunate, but it's just the way things are. But if you have a record, you have been assigned a lifetime sentence, whether you know it or not. And the stigma is going to outlive anybody who's alive today. I think over time it'll continue diminishing and it won't be such a bad thing. But still, right now, if you've committed a crime, no matter what a company says publicly, and no matter what most people say publicly, at the base of it, there's still that lingering, well, I never committed a crime. Why should you deserve anything special treatment? I managed to avoid doing it. But the truth is, what bullshit is that? Who hasn't gotten behind the wheel of their car with an extra beer in their stomach or an extra glass of wine? What business person hasn't taken a family dinner and charged it off as a business expense? Every business person does that with T&E, travel and entertainment, except you, of course, and me. But everybody else does it. And the only difference between them and people in prison is the people in prison got caught. There, but for the grace of God. So what you realize in prison is that morality generally is not nearly as black and white as people would like to make it out to be. I met people in prison that were jerks. They were nice people. They were just average people as far as I was concerned, no better, no worse than anybody else.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Just the view of it being very binary. We love to look at everything as just this side or that side. It's like politics. It's like how we view what's going on from a pandemic standpoint, reopen, closed forever, and there's no middle ground, recognizing instead that everything really is just it's a sliding scale, right? We're all kind of on a spectrum. And the more that we appreciate that we can have data points at multiple different spots on that sliding scale, I think that the more we start to really, and I bring up the word empathy again, but just show empathy towards others with regards to what they've been through, what they've done, what's happened to them. And ideally, just looking at somebody and wanting to have them have their best self be what lies ahead. Having somebody who
have a little compassion, have a little love in your heart.
Right.
Sometimes these people who have the most religious fervor are the least loving people.
I agree.
And it's like, come on. All right, they made a mistake. What do you want them to do? And the reality of it is 95% of people who are in prison are going to be coming out. What do you want them to do? If they can't get a job, what do you expect they will do? Do you expect that they won't eat, that they won't have a roof over their heads, that they're not going to want to take care of their families? If you don't give them a good option, they'll take the bad option because they have to.
Right.
And it's not because they were bad or they have some genetic defect. It's that their kids got hungry. Is that such a bad thing? It's sometimes it just boggles my mind how illogical all of that is. So, listen, if we can have a little love in our hearts and give someone a chance, and that's the kind of thing I'm really bad at. I walk down the street, if someone is rude to me, or if I'm, calling to pay my bill and the call center is taking too long, I get really impatient. And then I realize it's like, this poor person, he's just trying to do his job. He didn't come to work today to get yelled at by me. Who the hell am I? I don't have a right to do that to him or to her or to the universe, and make them mad, and they'll go home and hit their kids because some jerk customer. Have a little compassion. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think you're going to, as you mentioned, you're seeing that more and more. We talk about decreasing stigma. That's kind of the external things that people in this situation are dealing with. And I just want you to leave people with one thing just to kind of wrap this up today. But what would you say are some of the main reasons why people who have been in that situation will be able to be successful when it comes to just their approach, their mindset, and how they handle that transition?
That's a great, great question. It turns out that this population does incredibly well, for example, on the job. And again, I'm not talking about people who are nuts and violent and crazy. That's a very small percentage of the overall population. The truth is that studies have been conducted that have shown that on the job, that this population does extremely well. And unlike a lot of people these days who jump around from one job to another, particularly young people, this population will stick around longer. So that may be counterintuitive. You mean they do well? It turns out that within the HR profession, they believe, something like 80% believe, that they're as good as, if not better, on the job than someone without a record. Now you ask, why is that? Doesn't seem like it would be that it's right. But because they have so few options, they actually, if they do get into a situation, if they do get a job that's reasonably good, they will work so hard to make it work, because they know that if they screw up, there are few options outside of the job they currently have. They don't have another place to go, so they have to make it work. Sometimes having too many options, a menu that's too long, or too many members of, too many potential people to date. If you have too many options, if you're too good looking, you never want to make a commitment to one, maybe. And my people recognize that if they get a job, someone went out on a limb to hire them, and they will tend to reward that person or that company with their loyalty. So they work really, really hard, and they do great on the job, which inspires other people to work hard, and they stick around longer. So, it's just a question of, giving them a chance. And who among us hasn't asked for a chance, a second chance? That's what this is all about. Give someone a second chance, give them the tools to do well, and you just might be surprised, at how well they truly do. You're talking about companies that have a social mission. There are many of them out there that have discovered that hiring people with records not only was the right thing for them to do, corporately, but it actually has turned out to be very, very good business. And I believe that companies that are for profit, which we are, that also have a mission, really and truly are the future of business. Because people these days, young people particularly, they want to have some meaning in what they do other than just a paycheck. And when you could do work that pays your bills and also pays your soul, it is like really very, very powerful and very rewarding and satisfying. So, we don't always succeed, but that's always our mission.
Yeah. Well, I can really just appreciate everything that you've shared today, Richard. There's going to be some people, I think, that really walk away with this with a different perspective, and maybe at least some stuff that they're going to go kind of look into on their own. I wish you the best with the coming weeks and the coming months from a business standpoint. I hope that 70 million jobs is able to continue to flourish. I know this has obviously been a challenging time period for everybody in the business side of things, but I just like to see the traction and everything that you all had going before this pandemic hit. And I have no doubt that when the restrictions rightfully come off of society at some point, that you all are in a great spot. So, and to finish today, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about 70 million jobs or you as an individual?
Sure. We have a website, 70millionjobs.com, number 70 and million jobs, JOBS.com. And I can be reached at info@70millionjobs.com. I love to hear from people. And if you know folks who need help with jobs, it's tough right now, but certainly please let us know about that. We want to help everybody that we can.
Thanks for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you to all your listeners for your time. And if you're in a position, give somebody a chance. It'll do you good.
Perfect, Richard. Thank you. Have a great day.
My pleasure to be here. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the High Performers Podcast. We want to encourage you to join the conversation, access the show notes, and catch our latest episodes on the website. Please head to highperformerspodcast.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, thanks again for listening.